The world had already written off the tiny dragon as dead. It lay in the center of Blackridge's market square like a discarded relic from a more dangerous age. Smoke from cookfares drifted lazily overhead, mixing with the sharper scent of spilled gunpowder. The afternoon sky hung pale and indifferent above the gray stone buildings that ringed the square, their windows crowded with anxious faces. The dragon was small, painfully small. No larger than a housecat, its crimson scales were dulled by ash and street dust. One wing dragged at an awkward angle, the delicate membrane torn where it had struck cobblestone or boot. Its ribs fluttered rapidly with each shallow breath. A thin line of darker red traced along its flank where someone's blade or rough handling had nicked it. This was not the image painted in ancient murals. There were no thunderheads gathering overhead, no rivers of flame. Just a frightened creature alone in a hostile ring of iron and fear. The crowd that had gathered did not see rarity. They saw danger. "Kill it before it calls the rest," someone muttered. "It'll grow," said another, "they always grow." Old stories had a way of swelling in the mind when something unfamiliar appeared. Tales passed from grandparent to grandchild about dragon raids, charred farms, and blackened battlements. The truth of those stories had faded over generations, but fear endured. And fear demanded action. Steel rifles rose in unison. The soldiers of Blackridge formed a disciplined half-circle at the square's edge. Their boots were polished, their dark coats pressed, brass buttons catching faint sunlight. The long barrels of their rifles gleamed coldly as they leveled them toward the center. Powder sparked in priming pans with tiny, lethal flashes. The dragon lifted its head. Its golden eyes were wide, not with rage but with confusion. It turned slowly, taking in the walls of stone, the crowd pressing inward, the soldiers braced to fire. Its small claws scraped helplessly against cobble. It tried to spread its wings. The left one trembled violently before collapsing. The right lifted barely halfway before faltering. A faint hiss escaped its throat, more plea than threat. Captain Rorik Vance stood at the forefront, jaw tight, gloved hand raised. "On my marks," he commanded. The murmuring crowd quieted, anticipation thick in the air. A child began to cry and was quickly hushed. The dragon curled inward. Its tail wrapped around its body. Its wings folded as best they could over its head, as though it believed thin membrane could shield it from iron and fire. And then, he moved. Cale Durnan had never believed himself brave. He had grown up along the river's bend where the mill wheel turned day and night, steady as breath. His world had been grain sacks, wooden beams, the rhythm of stone grinding wheat into flour. His hands were rough not from sword hilts but from rope and timber. His strength had been shaped by labor, not battle. He had come to the square because of noise. The sharp bark of orders. The metallic click of rifles being raised. Curiosity first, then unease. He had pushed through the gathered townsfolk, muttering apologies as he went. Flour dust still clung faintly to his sleeves from the morning's work. He had not even meant to stay long. Then he saw it. The dragon was not majestic. It was terrified. That realization struck him harder than any shouted rumor. It did not roar. It did not posture. It simply tried to make itself small. Cale felt something in his chest tighten painfully. The captain's hand began to drop. There was no grand speech forming in Cale's mind, no vision of heroism, no thought of how history might remember him. He saw a creature about to die. He saw rifles aimed at something that could not even stand properly. And he stepped forward. The movement was almost clumsy in its suddenness. Someone shouted behind him. A hand brushed his sleeve too late. He crossed the last few yards at a jog and planted himself between the soldiers and the dragon. Gasps rippled through the square. "What are you doing?" someone yelled. Cale spread his arms instinctively, palms outward. He did not look back at the dragons. He did not look at the crowd. He faced the rifles. Captain Vance's eyes widened. "Stand aside," he barked. Cale did not move. The captain's hand dropped fully. The rifles fired. The sound shattered the air like splitting stone. Smoke burst outward in thick gray plumes. The recoil slammed into soldiers' shoulders in unison. Sparks spat briefly in the daylight. Cale felt the impact as a series of brutal punches. One in the chest. One near his shoulder. Another in his side. The force hurled him backward, breath ripped from his lungs in a violent gasp. Pain tore through him, sharp and blinding, his knees buckled. But he did not fall away. Some stubborn instinct rooted his boots to the stone. His arms remained wide even as his vision flashed white. He tasted copper instantly. His ears rang with a high, disorienting whine. Behind him, the tiny dragon shrieked. The sound was piercing and raw, cutting through the ringing in his ears. It was not the roar of a monster. It was anguish. Blood darkened Kale's shirt, blooming outward in uneven patterns. Warmth spread across his ribs and down his side. The smell of iron filled his nose. The crowd recoiled in horrors. He's dead. Idiot boy. The soldiers began reloading automatically, drilled motions overtaking surprise. Ramrods slid down barrels. Powder flasks tipped with mechanical precision. Kale's world narrowed. Each breath scraped like broken glass. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, uneven and heavy. He felt the bullets lodged inside him, foreign, wrong. He had been shot. The realization came without drama, just stark truth. He had thrown himself between gunfire and a dragon. And he was dying for it. The captain exhaled sharply, jaw clenched. Clear the line, he ordered, finish it. Kale tried to draw another breath. It hurt less than it should have. That was strange. The pain was still there, sharp, insistent, but something else threaded through it now. At first he thought it was simply blood loss, the body's last confused signals, but the heat did not fade. It grew. The bullets embedded in his flesh did not remain still. He felt them, felt their shape, felt their presence like cold stones lodged inside living muscle. And then, they softened. His body convulsed. The soldiers raised their rifles again. Another volley cracked. But this time the shots struck him differently. Instead of fresh eruptions of blood, there were flashes of light, brief and violent. The impacts drove him half a step back, yet no new wounds opened. The first bullets inside him began to melt. Not metaphorically. Truly. The hard shapes lodged in muscle lost their edges. They liquefied, searing but not tearing. Molten metal seeped into something deeper than flesh. Kale screamed. The sound ripped from him unrestrained, echoing off stone walls. Molten streaks of light spread beneath his skin, branching outward from each wound. They glowed bright gold, visible through fabric and flesh alike. The light traced across his chest and shoulders like living veins, each pulse synchronized with his hammering heart. The wounds did not bleed. They burned. Steam rose from his shirt as blood evaporated. The crowd fell silent. Even the soldiers faltered mid-motion. Kale staggered, one knee dipping toward the cobblestones. His hands trembled violently. The heat inside him was unbearable, like standing at the heart of a forge. But he did not fall. Behind him, the dragon's terrified cry changed. The high, panicked pitch softened. The shriek fractured into something lower, more resonant. It was no longer fear. It was recognition. The tiny dragon crawled closer despite the heat radiating from Kale's body. Its claws clicked softly against stone as it pressed near his boots, golden eyes fixed on the glowing lines spreading beneath his skin. The molten streaks intensified, branching outward like lightning trapped beneath flesh. They reached his collarbone, traced his ribs, curled down his arms. The embedded bullets dissolved completely, their substance joining the radiance. The pain shifted from tearing agony to fierce, transformative heat. Kale's breathing steadied. Not because the process stopped, but because it settled. His heart thundered once, so loud it seemed to echo beyond his body. The air around him shimmered violently. The second volley's bullets, those that had struck moments before, flattened against his skin without penetrating. They dropped to the ground at his feet with dull metallic clinks. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the soldiers. Captain Vance stared. Kale slowly lifted his head. His vision cleared. The ringing in his ears faded, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the stone, from the air, from the small dragon pressed against his heel. Two heartbeats echoed in his awareness. His own, and another's. Older. The golden light beneath his skin stabilized into defined channels, not wild, not chaotic. Purposeful. He drew in a breath. Smoke curled faintly from his lips. The dragon made a soft, almost questioning sound. Kale did not understand what was happening. But he understood this. He was not dying. Something had answered. In the fragile suspended space between one heartbeat and the next, the world had shifted, and the tiny dragon was no longer alone. The soldiers hesitated. They had faced riots before, smugglers, drunken brawlers with knives, once even a rogue mage who had set a barn ablaze in a fit of delusion. They had never faced this. Cale Durnan stood at the center of Blackridge's square, smoke coiling lazily from his torn shirt, molten light poolsing faintly beneath his skin. The tiny dragon pressed against his heel as though anchoring itself to him. Captain Rorik Vance felt the first thread of doubt tighten in his chest. Hold formation, he snapped, because discipline was the spine of power, and he would not allow that spine to bend in front of peasants. But discipline faltered when the laws of the world appeared to crack. Cale's skin began to change. At first it seemed like a trick of heat. The air around him shimmered as if the summer sun beat down instead of the pale autumn light. The glow beneath his flesh sharpened, no longer diffuse and wandering. It gathered. Hardened. Along his forearms, faint lines etched themselves into visibility. They caught the light in a way skin should not. The texture shifted, subtle, then undeniable. Bronze patches shimmered into existence. Not cloth. Not armor strapped into place. Scales. They surfaced slowly, rising from beneath his flesh as if drawn upward by unseen hands. Each one locked seamlessly against the next, overlapping in precise organic symmetry. They were not bulky or grotesque. They were sleek, purposeful. Beautiful in a terrible way. A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. He's cursed. No, that's dragon-marked. Cale gasped as his spine arched violently. The sound ripped from him raw and involuntary, a cry torn between agony and awakening. His back bowed as if an invisible hook had caught his vertebrae and yanked. The crack that followed was not bone-breaking. It was bone reshaping. His muscles convulsed beneath spreading bronze. His shirt split down the back with a sharp tear. Heat rolled outward in waves, forcing the nearest soldiers to squint and shift their footing. Smoke curled from Cale's mouth as he exhaled. Not thick, choking smoke. A thin silver stream. His blood felt wrong. Not liquid. Molten. It coursed through him in heavy surges, each heartbeat sending ripples of heat into his fingertips. His veins glowed faintly beneath the untransformed portions of his skin, branching lines of ember light that mirrored the earlier molten streaks, but steadier now, controlled. Behind him, the tiny dragon crept closer. It did not flee the heat. It sought it. The creature pressed its small body against his heel, then climbed carefully onto the back of his boot. Its claws did not pierce his skin. They settled there as if his flesh were already something stronger than leather. Captain Vance forced air into his lungs. Fire, he roared. Another volley rang out. The soldiers obeyed, if only to silence the creeping terror building in their throats. Rifles cracked in unison, smoke blasting outward in thick clouds. The bullets never reached him. 3 feet from Cale's body, the air rippled. There was no visible wall, no shield of shimmering light, nothing dramatic. Just resistance. The lead round struck something unseen and flattened with sharp metallic snaps. They fell harmlessly to the stone at his feet, clinking like discarded coins. One soldier dropped his rifle. Another stumbled back, crossing himself in panic. Cale straightened slowly. The motion was deliberate. Controlled. The last remnants of his torn shirt slipped from his shoulders, revealing skin now patterned in bronze and human tones alike. The scales spread upward from his arms across his shoulders, branching toward his collarbone. They crept along his neck, subtle at first, then bolder, tracing his jawline like living metal. His face changed without losing itself. His cheekbones seemed sharper, shadowed by faint ridges beneath the skin. His pupils narrowed vertically, slicing his gaze into something predatory and precise. His eyes burned. Not wildly, not uncontrollably, but with an inner furnace. He did not know how he understood. But he did. The dragon had not been helpless. It had been alone. The knowledge did not arrive as spoken words. It unfurled within him like a memory older than his own birth. Images flickered behind his thoughts, vast skis choked with smoke, dragons falling, humans with banners and cannons, betrayal written in fire. The heart flame stirred. Ancient magic older than Blackridge, older than the kingdom whose banner flew from its watchtower, shifted awake. older than rifles and gunpowder and the arrogance of iron. The dragon behind him was no common beast. It was a heartflame wormling, one of the last embers of a dying lineage. Its kind did not hoard gold. They hoarded bonds. They bound themselves not to conquerors, not to kings, but to choice. To those who stepped forward when survival demanded retreat. Not conquest, not power, choice. Kale had chosen. The realization settled into him with quiet certainty. The captain's breathing grew uneven. He had seen Dragonfire once before, years ago, a war in the south. A full-grown drake had turned a battalion to ash in seconds. This was no full-grown terror. This was a miller's son wrapped in something the captain did not understand. Fear sharpened into anger. Captain Vance drew his pistol from his belt. Unlike the long rifles, it was compact, close-range, personal. He stepped forward despite the heat radiating from Kale's body. "You'll not curse this town," he hissed, "monster or man." He aimed directly at Kale's head. The square seemed to shrink around that single line of sight. The dragon tightened its grip on Kale's shoulder, having climbed there unnoticed in the chaos. Its tiny claws rested against his collarbone, its golden eyes locked onto the captain. The pistol fired. The shot was deafening at that range. The bullet cut through the air with lethal precision. Kale moved without conscious thought. His hand rose. Fingers spread. Time seemed to stretch thin. The bullet struck his palm. There was a sharp crack, not of bone breaking, but of force colliding with something far denser than flesh. His fingers closed. When he opened his hand, the bullet rested in his grasp, flattened but intact. The metal began to glow. Red first, then orange, then white. Heat shimmered violently around his fist. The captain stumbled back, nearly dropping the pistol. The bullet did not explode. It dissolved. The white-hot lead fragmented into sparks that drifted downward like dying stars, fading before they touched the ground. Silence fell heavy and suffocating. Kale looked at his hand as the last ember winked out. He felt no burns, no wound, only warmth. He lifted his gaze to the captain. The world felt wider. He could sense the heat in the rifles still clutched by trembling soldiers. He could feel the banked coals in nearby hearths, the friction in the air where fear crackled like static. And beneath it all, the steady, living pulse of the dragon against his shoulder. 2 heartbeats. In rhythm. When he spoke, his voice did not belong solely to him. It carried an undertone deep and resonant, layered beneath his own, as though a vast chamber echoed each word half a breath behind him. Leave. The word was not shouted. It did not need to be. It rolled outward like distant thunder crossing mountain peaks. The cobblestones vibrated faintly, windows rattled, a hanging shop sign split down the middle with a sharp crack. The soldiers broke first. One stepped back, then another. A rifle clattered to stone. Captain Vance felt his authority crumble like brittle parchment in a flame. His men were not cowards, but they were not fools. They saw what stood before them. Not a demon raging without control. Not a mindless beast. A guardian, wrapped in bronze, eyes burning with measured fire. Retreat, the captain said at last, voice tight. No one argued. They backed away slowly at first, unwilling to turn their backs fully. Then, as distance grew and the heat lessened, discipline fractured entirely. Boots pounded against stone. Smoke lingered in their wake. The square emptied in ragged waves. Townsfolk scattered, dragging children and goods with them. Doors slammed, shutters closed. Within moments, the wide market that had been so full of noise stood nearly abandoned. Only drifting smoke and scattered fruit bore witness to what had happened. Kale remained where he stood, breathing. The transformation had not consumed him fully, but it had not receded either. Bronze scales covered his forearms entirely now, creeping across his shoulders and upper chest. They felt natural, not heavy, not foreign. Integrated. The dragon shifted, curling around his neck like a living mantle. Its warmth was no longer frantic, it was steady. He reached up slowly, giving himself time to stop if pain surged again. It did not. His fingers brushed the dragon's small head. Its scales were softer than they looked. The contact sent a pulse through him, not of heat but of understanding. Not words, not images this time. Emotion, gratitude, relief, loneliness fatting. He swallowed hard. The square smelled of powder and scorched metal, of fear. But beneath it something else lingered. Hope. He had not asked for this, had not sought power. Yet the heart flame had answered him. Not because he was strong, not because he was special, because he had stepped forward, because he had chosen to shield something smaller than himself. The bronze beneath his skin glowed faintly once more, then stabilized into a dull sheen. The fire did not rage. It waited. Within him. Awake. And Blackridge, whether it knew it or not, had just witnessed the rebirth of something the world had tried very hard to extinguish. Silence fell over Blackridge. Not the ordinary hush of a market pausing between customers, not the wary quiet that follows a loud argument. This was deeper, heavier. The kind of silence that settles after something impossible has forced the world to reconsider itself. Smoke drifted in thin, fatting ribbons above the square. A few abandoned apples rolled lazily across uneven cobblestones, nudged by a hesitant breeze. A broken shutter creaked softly against its hinges somewhere overhead. At the center of it all, Cale Durnan collapsed to one knee. The transformation did not end in thunder or flame. It slowed. The molten brilliance beneath his skin dimmed from blinding gold to a steady bronze glow. The unbearable heat receded into something contained, like a forge sealed behind thick iron doors. The scales remained. They lay embedded across his forearms, his shoulders, and the broad plane of his chest like living armor grown rather than crafted. Each scale overlapped seamlessly with the next, polished but not reflective, strong yet organic. They did not feel foreign. They felt earned. His breath came in deep, controlled pulls now. No smoke curled from his lips. No sparks danced from his fingertips. But warmth pulsed steadily beneath his skin with each heartbeat. Alive. Aware. Cale braced one hand against the cobblestones, steadying himself. The stone beneath his palm was faintly warm, though whether from lingering magic or memory of gunfire he could not tell. The square remained empty. The soldiers had retreated to the far street, unwilling to test whatever power now stood where a miller's son once had. The townsfolk watched from windows and doorways, fear and awe warring in equal measure across pale faces. Behind him, small claws clicked softly. The tiny dragon climbed his back carefully. Its movements were cautious, not from fear of him but from care. It scaled his shoulder as though testing unfamiliar terrain. Its weight was light, barely noticeable, yet the contact sent a ripple of warmth through him. It curled around his neck like a living scarf, tail draping across his collarbone. Its small head pressed gently against his cheek. Cale closed his eyes. The glow between them softened. Not extinguished. Harmonized. Where before there had been searing intensity, there was now quiet resonance. Two heartbeats steady and synchronized. He understood. Not through words spoken aloud, not through visions cast across his mind. Through clarity. The heart flame did not create monsters. It revealed guardians. The truth settled into him with calm certainty. The power that had answered him had not come because he was strong. It had not sought dominance or destruction. It had responded to choice. He had stepped forward when retreat would have been easier. He had raised empty hands against rifles because something smaller than him needed shielding. The magic had not twisted him into something inhuman. It had fused with what was already there. The dragon's ancient essence flowed alongside his humanity, not erasing it, not drowning it, but interweaving. He was not less human. He was more. Something both. He rose slowly from one knee. His movements felt different now, not heavier, not clumsier, but grounded. Each step carried a subtle weight as though the earth itself acknowledged him. The dragon shifted slightly to maintain balance, claws resting against bronze scales without piercing them. Cale looked down at his hands. The scales did not retract. They did not flicker uncertainly. They remained. A visible truth. A promise. He flexed his fingers experimentally. The bronze plates moved with him, flexible yet solid. Beneath them, muscle coiled with restrained strength. He could feel the difference, not explosive or wild but enduring. enduring like stone shaped by time. A door creaked open across the square. Old Mara Fenwick, who had run the bakery for longer than Kale had been alive, stepped cautiously into view. Her flour-dusted apron fluttered faintly in the breeze. "Kale," she called softly. Her voice trembled not from accusation but from uncertainty. He turned toward her. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, fully at the scales, at the faint glow beneath skin, but she did not run. He saw the question there. "Are you still you?" Kale inhaled slowly. "Yes," he answered, voice steady. It carried an echo still deep and resonant, but it was unmistakably his. The dragon made a quiet churring sound beside his ear, as if affirming the statement. More doors opened cautiously. Faces emerged. Fear lingered, but curiosity pressed against it. Children peeked from behind skirts. A few men stepped forward uncertainly, hands hovering near tools or makeshift weapons, not raised but not entirely lowered either. Captain Vance stood at the far end of the street, rigid and watchful. Kale met his gaze. There was no hatred in him, no urge to retaliate. He could feel the fire within him, powerful, vast, but it did not demand destruction. It waited, responded. It was not rage. It was protection. The captain swallowed visibly. He nodded once stiffly, not in surrender but in acknowledgement. Then he turned and began issuing quiet orders to his men. The rifles were lowered, the formation dissolved. Blackridge had witnessed enough for one day. Kale reached up slowly and touched the dragon's small head. Its golden eyes half-lidded at the contact. "What now?" he murmured, though he did not expect spoken reply. But he felt the answer. Movement, distance, purpose. The heart flame was not meant to remain hidden in one small square. It stirred at the thought of roads stretching beyond the town gates, of forests thick and shadowed, of villages that might one day face fear as this one had. The dragon's tail tightened gently around his collarbone. Partnership, not ownership, not control. They would walk together. He turned once more to take in the square. The overturned stalls. The scattered fruit. The faint scorch marks where bullets had struck stone. He saw not a battlefield, but a beginning. Kale Durnan would never return to his mill. He knew that with quiet certainty. The river would continue turning the wheel without him. Grain would still be ground, bread would still be baked. But something had shifted inside him that could not be undone. He was no longer only a miller's son. He was not a weapons, not a king, not a dragon in human skin. He was a bridge between ancient flame and mortal choice, between fear and protection. Word would spread. Blackridge was not a city that kept secrets well. By nightfall, traders would carry the story to the next town. By week's end, it would travel along caravans and riverboats. By month's turn, it would reach the capital. Stories of a man who stood against rifles and did not burn. Of bronze scales that turned aside steel. Of fire that answered not to rage but to protection. Some would call him cursed. Some would call him chosen. Some would hunt him. Others would seek him. But none would forget. He began walking toward the edge of the square. The crowd parted instinctively. Not in terror. In respect. The dragon lifted its head proudly as they passed through the gap, its small form unmistakable against Kale's broad shoulder. At the town's edge, Kale paused. Beyond lay open roads. Fields fatting into woodland. Hills rising toward distant mountains, where legends whispered dragons once ruled the skies unchallenged. He could feel the world differently now. The warmth of hearthfires in nearby homes. The faint friction of flint striking steel somewhere behind him. The quiet potential in every spark. And beneath it all, the steady, ancient pulse of the heart flame. He stepped beyond Blackridge's gates. The guards did not try to stop him. Wherever greed would raise a weapon against the small and defenseless, gunpowder would falter. Wherever fear would justify cruelty, flame would answer differently. Not to consume, to shield. Because humanity, when it chose to protect rather than destroy, proved stronger than ancient fire. Stronger than rifles. Stronger than fear. The dragon nuzzled lightly against his cheek as they walked. Kale smiled faintly. The road stretched long ahead. And sometimes, when humanity remembered what it was capable of, it grew scales,